Boom! Hello and welcome to the Executive Protection Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Byron Rodgers. This podcast is dedicated to the executive protection practitioner, the private security professional. In this podcast, we're going to talk about the mental, emotional, psychological, physiological fitness that goes into being an efficient and effective executive protection agent. Whether you're in law enforcement, whether you're a mom that's looking at how to protect her children, or a father that's focused on how to protect his family, I believe this podcast has something for all of you. We might even get into some tales from the crypts of true Hollywood stories from time to time. I'm doing this podcast because I feel the reality of this job is simple. If you really want to be good at executive protection, it's more than just a job. It really is a lifestyle. And those of you who've been in the game for any serious amount of time, you already know what I'm saying is true. So if that sounds interesting to you, enjoy the show. Out. Boom! Yo, special announcement. We've got the very first Protector Symposium coming up this November 15th and 16th. Check the website, Byron Rodgers Motivation, for more information about it. You can purchase tickets there. It's going to be amazing. We've got Ed Calderon and Yosef Badu coming on to teach us some hardcore soft skills. Check it out. Get involved. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. We're going to have a great time leveling up as Protector. So check the website, ByronRodgersMotivation.com or ExecutiveProtectionLifestyle.com for all the details and to purchase you and your security detail, police department, or family's tickets. Out. Boom. Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm back with Toben. We are doing a sequel here from the last episode that we did. But it's a different subject matter. It's a different subject matter altogether. So how you doing, Ami? Good to have you back.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back. It's one thing to have me on one time, but to be invited back is quite a thing. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. You got a lot of good content to share, man. A lot of stuff for us to, go through. So real quick, just in case it's the first time someone's hearing from you, real quick overview of your background.
Yeah, so I am the Director of Consulting, Training, and Special Operations for a San Francisco Bay Area company called HiCom Security Services. We're a company that does high-level preventive work. We got started doing terrorist activity prevention, bringing Israeli methodologies of terrorist activity prevention to an environment that's very different from Israel. And we do a lot of high-level work with Israeli government, Jewish community, lots of other foreign governments, lots of other high-end kind of companies, Silicon Valley, and so forth. And to segue from that into, I guess, what we're going to talk about mostly today is surveillance detection, which is kind of an offshoot, at least as far as my process was, from terrorist activity prevention, getting deeper into the mechanics of hostile planning and detection of hostile planning, which gets you to detection of hostile surveillance. So that maybe just, I'm born and raised, I was born and raised in Israel, did my IDF service there in the mid-90s. So that's also a factor, and did some specialized training in surveillance detection later on, also in Israel, and have been working in HiCom Security Services here in the San Francisco Bay Area in private sector security for the last 14 and a half years or so. I do a lot of writing, so a lot of people might have seen me before online with my blog, Protection Circle. You can find it at protectioncircle.org, and my book, Surveillance Zone. And by the way, I purposely kind of have it, if anybody was wondering from the first chapter that we recorded, why I'm sitting in my kitchen right now, and why I have this kind of fancy audio equipment is because I just finished recently recording the audio version of my book Surveillance Zone, which is out now. So shameless plug.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have all this fancy audio equipment, and I'm sitting in my kitchen also because I think I mentioned this in the last podcast where I was going to write this article about the process of writing and publishing a book and recording an audio, which I did end up. That article is out. You can look it up at Protection Circle. And about how a lot of the writing and a lot of the work that's done in the background of a lot of the stuff you see and hear regarding terrorist activity prevention and surveillance detection and all that kind of fancy kind of stuff, a lot of the writing and a lot of the bulk of the trenches of that takes place right here in my own kitchen, wearing pajamas, very ignobly. There's a lot of kind of hard work that goes behind the scenes of a lot of stuff that seems much more, it seems flashy, but a lot of the work is kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, man. That's the game, man. The guerrilla warfare of it, making things work and just getting to work in your pajamas sometimes if you can.
Part of my shtick, it's like, it's really cool to show photos, Instagram worthy photos from the field and stuff. But I love also showing how it looks in the trenches, how it looks in like the not so flashy kind of parts of it.
Yeah. The guts. That's good stuff, man. And just for those listeners, just to be clear, the last episode we did was on stopping terrorist activity and counter-terrorist activity operations and things like that. Terrorist activity prevention specifically was the title for that one. So if that's interesting to you, go check it out. It was a good episode. And today we're going to get into SD, man. That's what everybody, that's one of the new cool things in the EP industry and the security, probably should just say private security industry.
Yeah.
So we're going to jump up into that, but real quick, your book is kind of about that too. You want to touch on that real quick?
Yeah, it's essentially an expose on, it's an expose plus, I don't want to say tutorial because you can't learn how to do something. You can't do something just by reading a book.
Right.
But it's explaining about this field of corporate surveillance detection and covert special operations. And the expose part of it is revealing the fact that it's been going on for quite a while, and there's quite a bit of it going on. And a big part of what I do in the book is share actual stories from the field, actual operations, actual trainings, actual things that have happened. I use discretion and I change a few things, and I don't reveal any names of clients, of course. But I want to kind of share a bit of the reality of what happens out there. And pretty much every chapter kind of starts with a story, sometimes continues with a story from an actual operation, and then goes into the mechanics of what it is that we do. How do we do it? How is it done? Going from surveillance to surveillance detection to static surveillance detection, mobile surveillance detection, covert methodology, and I give a lot of examples and, as I said, stories from the field. So, yeah.
Awesome. No, the stories are awesome. It's that makes everything more interesting. So that's good. Good to go, man. All right. So SD, surveillance detection 101. Break it down if you're
okay.
Blank canvas.
Yeah, I think I'll break it down. I'm going to try to avoid making any pronouncements about this is how it is and this is how it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. There's different ways about this. There's different takes on it. There's even different definitions altogether of what it is that we're doing. So I will give you my own. I mean, I didn't make this up. I learned this. There's some things that I learned over time, but we start by the fact that what we're doing is high-level preventive work. We already broke down the fact that what we're doing is prevention and not, strictly speaking, reaction. So we're not doing force-on-force or reactive countermeasures to stop an attack. We're looking to prevent it from happening in the first place. The key to doing prevention is not to target an attack. Again, that would be reactive, is to target what comes before the attack, which is hostile planning. When you target hostile planning, you want to nip it in the bud so it will never reach the point where it materializes into an attack. Within hostile planning, I kind of broke it down a little bit or a lot in the last podcast, in the last episode. The most important steps within the hostile planning process for us to prevent are the surveillance steps. And the reason is because those might be the only steps in the process where somebody actually shows up. before the attack, somebody is actually present. If they're present and we're present, we have an opportunity to do something about it. Now, conventional security can deter. This is a lot of what we do: deterrence by appearance, detection, exposing, all of that kind of stuff. But there is also the ability to detect it covertly. And in some cases, that's necessary. When we don't necessarily want to simply deter, we might want to collect some information, some intel on the entity, or we might not want the entity to be deterred and then come back in a place where we can't detect it again. So again, there might be a need to detect hostile surveillance, and that's what gets you into surveillance detection, and that's the main reason why surveillance detection might need to be conducted, or needs to be in a classic form, needs to be conducted covertly. This is not to say that there aren't. I do quite a bit of instruction to other teams of conventional security, of equipping them with elements of surveillance detection into their conventional security. That's not strictly speaking surveillance detection. That's surveillance detection enabled security. Surveillance detection itself is conducted covertly. What you want to do is detect the indicators of hostile surveillance without them detecting you. The way you do it ideally is to detect correlations. I can get into that in a little bit, but correlations it gets a little tricky. And again, wanting to detect those without them detecting you in order to have the ability to report and to follow that up with something. So surveillance detection, as its name indicates, it's a detection of surveillance. It's a detection of a problem. You obviously don't detect it for the hell of it. You detect it for some kind of follow-up. Follow-ups, whatever they may be. It could be a conventional follow-up by security or law enforcement. It could be more of an unconventional follow-up in the sense of counter-surveillance. Again, these are the definitions I learned. Other people know counter-surveillance in other ways, but the way I learned it, counter-surveillance is when you turn the tables and start doing surveillance on the surveillance. You're not just detecting them. You have to detect them first, but then you're going offensive on them. You go and start following them to collect intel or evidence on them for whatever follow-up might happen.
Wow. So look at that. So it's I mean, these are the layers and levels of really the surveillance game, so that it's not so much about decisive action in terms of being an aggressor or even making contact with your subject. This is all surveillance stuff. It's
exactly
counter surveillance, which is countering and going back and conducting surveillance.
And again, some people have the definitions where counter surveillance is actually what I define surveillance detection. Some people use the term, I think in England, they use it a lot, anti-surveillance, which is more of an umbrella for all of that because that's kind of what we're trying to do. What I learned is that surveillance detection is the detection of it, and then follow-up might be counter surveillance. One important thing I want to mention, two maybe, is that we're not trying to detect surveillance for its own sake. Surveillance by itself is not the main problem. So we don't want to make more out of hostile surveillance than it is. We don't want to make more out of surveillance detection than it is. Surveillance is hostile surveillance is a very important part in the hostile planning process. It's the most detectable part to us. What we're most concerned about, what everybody's most concerned about, is an attack on principle, an attack on the client. That's what we're trying to detect. We're not going to wait for the attack to come. We're going to detect the indicators before the attack that somebody's planning. And the best indicators, once again, are hostile surveillance. So we're trying to, that's what we're trying to do, and not to make more out of it than it is. I mean, it does sound very sexy. I agree. And it's really cool, but we're not just doing it for fun.
Sexiness.
And surveillance by itself, somebody's surveillance not going to kill anybody.
Right.
It's what the surveillance is used for.
Intent.
Information that is gathered, that is used to put together an attack, that's going to hurt somebody. So that's what we want to prevent. And because it's so not, like you said, it's not force on force or anything like that. I put surveillance detection in the field of protective intelligence rather than in the field of physical security.
Yeah.
You are not securing, you're gathering field intel. So it's field protective intelligence is how I put it.
Outstanding. So then with the correlation then, is that what takes place when you start to see, okay, well, why is this person surveilling us? And you make correlations that make those motivations more and more clear?
So the correlation is actually something that the hostile surveillant does. And that's what we're trying to detect. A correlation it's an umbrella term. And let me break it down to what it means. Maybe the most straightforward version is somebody's in the area observing the client. So you can look at that line of sight. They're observing because they're collecting visual information, right? They're not there for fun. They're collecting information for a hostile plan. That line of sight between their eyes and the client, whatever it may be, a principal or a facility or a campus or a main entrance or a loading dock or a back entrance, that line of sight is a correlation. A correlation is kind of a connection between the client, or a vulnerability in the client really, and the hostile individual who's collecting the information on it. So I like to put it as like an equation. It's got two sides, and the correlation is what connects the two sides of the equation. It isn't always apparent, and you have to position yourself not only to be able to see both ends of it, otherwise how will you see the correlation, but to be able to see both sides of it covertly, which is to say, in most cases, you want to be behind the hostile surveillant. You want to be outside of their field of vision so they don't see that you've just detected them. Which means if you got an equation and you got the client here and the hostile surveillant here, I don't necessarily want to be here on the sides to see both things because the surveillant I'm in their field of vision. So I want to be behind them, which means if you turn it around, I want to be sort of looking at the backs of heads of a hostile surveillant and looking at the correlations or along the correlation rather than across it. That way I can reduce the risk of me being detected while I'm doing it. So
yeah,
an example, by the way, of the fact that it's not physical protection because I'm willingly allowing a hostile surveillance to be closer to the principal or the client than I am. I'm putting myself behind them, which it's important to mention, this is not instead of security. You should have physical protection. We're augmenting it with another layer of, as I said, field protective intelligence. So I've taught a lot of people and I've worked with a lot of people who have a problem with that. You know, you're a protector and it drives people crazy. How can I be so far away, like a block and a half away in a coffee shop, pretending to look at my phone, allowing somebody in a vantage point to be closer to the client than me? It drives people crazy, but that's sort of some of the dynamics that go into this. So that would be a correlation of observation. There are other correlations. Correlation of movement is another sort of, I think, easy to understand, where if you have a mobile target, a mobile principal, and somebody's correlating that to them in movement. They go, they stop, they turn. Over a long enough period of time, you can eliminate coincidences because a lot of people might be going the same way to a certain extent. Right. Over enough time, and if you position yourself correctly, you can observe that somebody isn't just coincidentally going the same way. Somebody is purposely following, purposely correlating in movement, which could also correlate in observation as well. And you spotted a connection between somebody and the client. So that's what we're trying to spot, those connections, those correlations.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I'm more of a direct action guy on the ground, close protection, advanced work, when I'm like looking at my routes and doing advanced work, I'm looking for surveillance at that time, but it's not like something that I really, really, really understand the nuts and bolts of. So it's awesome really hearing you get into the weeds with it. It's much appreciated. The correlation stuff is very interesting because you're right. You're out sneaking the sneaky. You're surveilling them, and it doesn't demand that you immediately do something to stop them from their behavior. The mission.
If you're doing straight up SD, it demands that you don't, which is another kind of thing that's hard.
Because you get more.
Because you detect a suspicious person. I mean, you detect a correlation. You detect a hostile observer. You report it, and in most cases, no. You not only do you not do anything about it because maybe other people are supposed to do something about it. I've had cases where I need to take off now. I can't even stick around to watch what happens. I to some extent, but that's already getting risky if I stick around. I've completed my job. It's an intel job. If you stick around, you have sharply diminishing returns after you've already reported what happens, especially if there's another follow-up that's more conventional. If somebody figures out that, hey, how did these conventional campus security triangulate on me so quickly? Somebody must be here. They have a higher chance of detecting you, and you don't want that. So,
and then they disappear and reshuffle the deck and come with different.
Or they figure out that the corporation in question is employing covert surveillance detection, and they splatter that all over social media, and bad stuff happens, and bad public relations and so forth. So, for example, since I'm kind of big on stories and stuff, so. I've had that in one of the big tech conferences in Silicon Valley. There are literally, there are hundreds of security officers doing everything there. But they wanted another layer of field intel around all of that to see if anybody's trying to outsmart security. These are campus security or event security officers. It's not particularly high level.
Okay.
Anything can be outsmarted if you give a hostile observer enough time. So we don't want to give him enough time. So we're going to see if anybody's going to observe. And in one of the, I'm working this place a few days already, and I see somebody walking into an empty field. This isn't necessarily straight up SD, but it's the kind of stuff that you pick up when you know where to look for.
And what to look for.
An empty field, not even all that close to the venue. And somebody's walking into the field carrying kind of a big case, a big kind of dark plastic case, and he lays it down on the ground. And I'm seeing him doing that. I was like, what's that guy doing with that case going into that field? So I keep walking. I don't immediately stop. I keep walking, looking for a good sort of little vantage point for me to observe him. Some parking lot, a little bit there, a few cars, some trees. I kind of stop after a while and kind of pretend to look at my phone, and I'm looking at him and I'm behind him, and he keeps walking and he goes to the middle of the field and he opens up that case and he takes something out of it. I can't really see what it is. He puts it on the ground and he takes something else and he holds it with two hands, and he does a few things, and whoop, that little thing kind of starts floating up, and whoop, we have a drone in the air. All right. And, boom, you report it. And like 60 seconds later, 3 campus security officers triangulate on him immediately. You're not supposed to fly drones there. The company actually owns that area. And there's a huge conference. You might want to fly that thing over the conference. And it's a good example of the kind of stuff that if you're positioned correctly, and if you know what to look for, you know the vantage points to pay attention to, you're better positioned to detect something like that. And also an example of what I said, as soon as I see the security officers triangulate on him, it's my detection. Like, I did it. I want to see what happened. It's not. That's it. You have diminishing returns at this point because you have only what to lose and not all that much to gain. It's already their show. And if that guy figures out that there's no way these 3 security officers found me this quickly, he might realize that somebody else might be in play around the game and have a better chance of spotting me. So no, I walk off at that point.
Outstanding.
It's you need a bit of kind of self-discipline for a lot of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good stuff, man. And so you just basically ghost after that happens. You laze the target and then vanish.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good. I never thought of that. That's a good analogy. Yeah,
Thank you.
To laze it for the follow up to come, and at that point, you don't want them to know that somebody must have been lazing this. Somebody else is here. No, I'm not there at that point. Yeah.
So essentially, you saw like that person broke away from kind of the baseline of what was normal in that environment, and that's what caught your eye.
In that case, yeah. I mean, it was.
Usually,
I mean, most people don't walk into the middle of an empty field kind of next to a big conference. So it already, I mean, it wasn't like he was working completely covertly. He did have a good amount of distance though. And that's the thing. So it's not to say that a thing like that is impossible for somebody not doing SD to potentially detect. Nothing we do is necessarily magic, Nothing we do, we're just humans with pairs of eyes, but we observe things from a different perspective, also physically from a different perspective, from outside of what we call the red zone, which is where the vantage points are. We know where vantage points are because we do that kind of advanced work and mapping. And I can explain a little bit about that as well. We know where to look for. And to do this properly, we have a lot of patience. I'm talking days and days of looking at just benches and fields and just vantage points and looking at the people sitting there. It's not something that a security officer usually does. It's not something you can position security officers to do. So there are some tendencies and there is some training that needs to go into doing something like this.
In order to understand the mindset and manage your expectations to hold up under it.
And spend the time and invest the time. There's a lot of self-discipline that needs to go into that. Especially when it's overnight and stuff, it's pretty tedious kind of work a lot of the time. Again, sort of busting that myth that this is sort of exciting stuff. It's like a lot of the time you have to deal with, mind-numbing tedium and how to stay aware when really there's not a lot going on because that's your job.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like kind of also the role of the imagination that the imagination plays both in the close protection aspect of things. And it sounds like with the SD work, it's for us, it's what could happen. I'm staying ahead of the curve by imagining all the different outcomes. And as we go into this room, I need to push guys through to the next choke point, take a look, because this could happen out there and that could happen here. And, so I'm using my imagination to like perceive that which cannot be seen with the naked eye, as Musashi would say, and then it sounds like in the SD world, a lot of it is kind of understanding and almost like the same game. It's mind numbing. It's boring. Because with our stuff too, it can get monotonous, which can start you in a cycle of complacency, which can cause you to fail. It seems like with you guys too, a lot of the work is done up here, kind of like, what does this mean? And looking for correlations and some imagination as well.
Yeah. And, I think for both of those, because I do a good amount of conventional security as well. I don't just do SD. I do way more conventional stuff than what I call unconventional covert work. But, another interesting aspect, both with conventional and unconventional, is you use your imagination, but you can't go too far with that because you'll go crazy. I mean, either you won't let anybody get close to the principal and everything looks suspicious. And with SD, everything is a correlation. You have to go with some guidelines, and with SD, because it's so psychological. And I've worked with some people who've had some issues with that, where all of a sudden there's hostile surveillance everywhere. There's other teams of surveillance detection. There's other teams of who are these teams? And your mind starts playing.
See what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Your mind, you can do that all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Once you have a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail, right?
Right.
And you have to work by some principles. And with SD, it's correlation. Yes, it's suspicious. Okay, take note of it. But is there a correlation? Is there? And if the answer is no, or you can't frame your suspicions within the structure of a correlation,
Yeah.
then it's not a correlation. Then again, don't ignore it. I mean, kind of make a little mental note of it, but don't let it drive you crazy, because there's a lot of white noise out there, and your mind can also play tricks on you.
Yeah, and don't let it drive you to see something else. It's like therapy. If you have a suspicion that a client's doing or saying something, it's easy for a therapist to like follow that hunch and like lead them in a way.
Yeah.
And what you end up doing
Suggestion,
is, you reveal your suspicion to a client that's paying attention.
Yeah.
But, that's interesting. And that same type of correlation game is played as well. So that's kind of a 101. How it's applied with private security, you touched on a little bit. But would you want to maybe, so really it sounds like SD is something that's designed to enable really the close protections or a lot of private security operations. It's a tool, it's an asset, really.
So, I think a good way to break it down is that you can do, I'll use the term pure SD in the sense of like dedicated covert SD operators that augment a physical, let's say EP effort. And these are people that are usually outside. They have more of a distance and they're working covertly, and they're behind the red zone, so they're behind the surveillance vantage points. But the other, I think you just touched on is SD enabled security to enable. A lot of what I do, I have trainings, I conduct trainings quite a bit on this, of enabling conventional security, either executive protection or campus security, to have certain elements, have certain understanding of surveillance detection. They're not going to work covertly. It's not going to be that sort of covert cat and mouse kind of thing. It's just going to enable overt conventional force detect more than they would otherwise detect. And a good way to start with that is you have to start with any kind of prevention, but definitely with SD enabled security. You have to start with the adversarial position. Look at the client as a target. How would you target this client? And where would you position yourself? What would you do? What would you have to collect if you didn't know all the things you know as an insider necessarily? Yeah. And what we're looking for oftentimes are not just the suspicious indicators about the person, but vantage points in the area. Where would you position yourself if you don't want to just stand in front of the entrance or stand on the street like a sore thumb to do your surveillance on a very low level, and making it more likely that security will detect you, even conventional security? Where would you go? What coffee shop or bench or park or busy intersection or gas station or where would you put yourself to kind of blend in with a little bit more distance to observe the target for a longer period of time and collect more intel on it as a bad guy? And now that you know, if you've mapped those physically, if you've gone around as a bad guy to look at all the vantage points that could look at, say, entrances and vulnerabilities in the target, now you know at the very least, say you're doing an advance, that's an important part of your advance. Absolutely. Is to locate those, not just the vulnerabilities in the target, but the vantage points around from which somebody can observe a vulnerability before they even get to the vulnerability. And we take that information, and the follow-up with an SD-enabled security would be pay attention to those vantage points. I can tell officers pay attention to everything around, but it's a lot. It could be very, very confusing. So yes, I want you to pay attention to everything, but pay specific attention to that spot and to that spot. Specific attention means anybody there gets attention from you. That might be enough. Don't have to do anything dramatic. This is public property over there. They're not doing anything wrong. They're just sitting around. But anybody there gets attention from you. What's attention? Acknowledgement, a little bit, maybe a wave, maybe kind of, hey, how you doing? How's it going? Because those are really good vantage points from which to observe vulnerabilities on the target.
Absolutely.
And by giving conventional security officers those simple elements, because they are pretty simple, you really, really raise their game. They don't even necessarily have to know exactly what they're doing. I'm talking about you can take campus security. You can take low-level security officers.
Square badge.
And just tell them, I want you to pay attention to here and here specifically. Anybody there gets a nod, gets a wave, go and say hi to them. That's it. That's all you need to do. Because if somebody's trying to collect information to observe it covertly, just that amount of attention from security is very likely to deter them. It's very likely to show them that this is not the easiest place if they're getting that amount of attention before they ever get close to the facility.
Yeah, and it helps your officers focus their attention and energy in a way that's just so much more productive.
Exactly.
Their perception, their perspective. Now it helps them do things like they're just seeing through the matrix a little bit more. That's this area right here. These people, maybe they're not doing anything wrong, but they go from like green to yellow if they're loitering around here.
Exactly.
And the reasons why is because these are our vulnerabilities, and this is where someone would want to, collect that data, So, yeah. And then instead of just walking around the campus,
you're giving them a purpose. You got to sort of empathize with them a little bit. A lot of campus security, it could be pretty tedious for those guys as well. So the tedium is a huge enemy for security. Yeah. Everybody thinks that the hostels are the big enemy. A huge enemy to maintaining a good level of security is that tedium and boredom that a lot of security officers have to deal with. And not everybody can deal with it very well. So if you give them these insights, you give them these things to look for, you're channeling them, you're making it easier for them to stay decent. And if you want to go even a step further, like HICOM does, you supervise them from those positions. It's not exactly red teaming, or maybe it's very low-level red teaming, but you get field supervisors to go and take positions there and to see how long it takes the security officers to spot that a supervisor is there. Yeah. It's okay that they recognize the supervisor, because that's not the main point. The main point is to check that they're looking, that they're paying attention to those. If you can recognize a supervisor there, you can observe somebody else who might be sitting there, give them attention. Yeah.
And it drives behavior, supervisor might be out there.
Exactly. It's not, it's not so much kind of a carrot and a stick kind of thing, or you're not beating them over the head with it. You're just giving them something to bounce off of, it's taking it out of theory and talking about the practice of, that's how it feels when somebody's there. Or wait, you were there for 25 minutes and I didn't, damn it. Okay. Next time I'll have to pay attention, because that's what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man. Yeah. What kind of frequently asked questions do you get about SD? Probably through your website, I imagine you get.
Yeah, there's some.
Anything stand out to you?
There's quite a bit. I think a big question is that sort of dichotomy between pure SD and SD enabled security. A lot of times, a lot of the requests for SD training or SD operations, mostly SD training. As soon as I start asking the right questions, okay, who do you want me to train? What are we training them on? It becomes very apparent that this is SD enabled security. You don't have the resources, or you're not going to dedicate full time or even part time covert operators to be there. You just want your security force to be better trained on detecting and on the sensitivity and raising their consciousness to this stuff, to raise their game. So that's a big one. Another one that goes into
kind of like little, just basically training teams on what to do while they're out on the move, the EP operators or whoever it is, in order to be able to kind of see through the matrix and notice more of who's could be surveilling them.
Yeah. How to raise their game to look for that kind of stuff. Don't just look for attackers, attack on principle, suspicious behavior, fight or flight response kind of stuff. No. Look for what comes even before that. Right? Yeah. So you want to really kind of dig deeper, earlier, nip it in the smaller bud, before it even comes to you. And for that, you're going to have to look farther and deeper.
Like how?
to those vantage points,
those vantage points,
where somebody would position themselves to even learn about a vulnerability before they ever get close to do something about that vulnerability.
One of the things I always find funny is when you're with your client and, from, working outward from your client, if you ever want to know where your client's vulnerable, I think I said this already, but if you ever want to know where your client's vulnerable, look for the camera guy, man. The camera guys get the best angles when you're looking at that type of client at venues and stuff like that. It's like, I'm always looking for, okay, who's got the angles on my client and what's going on out here. And whenever I'm at a venue, you'll see a camera guy standing right there. Or if I'm in the crowd, working the crowd, and I'll be looking for the angles and I'll be like, all right, this is a good spot. And right next.
And that's essentially a vantage point, a type of a vantage point. And for legit cameramen, it's not a covert vantage point, but it's a vantage point nonetheless, right?
Yeah, with a straight shot usually. Yeah. What kind of little do's and don'ts around, noticing if someone's watching you? Is there anything else that kind of stands out? Like, if you're on foot walking around with a client, are there any little things besides the nervous behavior?
Yes. So we talked about observation.
Yes,
somebody who's observing, and not just observing by chance, but observing with what seems to be purpose, which oftentimes is longer than a normal person sits and just looks at a interesting looking building or something going on. There's movement, as we said, if there is movement involved. There's also gesturing, which is kind of an interesting thing. So you want to detect if there's any correlations of gestures or communication gestures and things like that of the individual correlating to specific times regarding what the client does. So if the client is a facility or an event and arrival of individuals or arrival of VIPs, or even if it's just a break when somebody goes out, and here's somebody in a vantage point, either filming at that, or maybe taking note of it, or maybe communicating it in some way. Arrival of principal, departure of principal. Somebody, both times, that's the only time somebody took their phone out, put something in the phone that was principal arriving, and here's principal leaving. Somebody's kind of gesturing on the phone again. It could be something as subtle as that, but that's a good correlation of somebody who's trying to collect intel on your principal arrival and departure, which we all know are tricky times you want to pay close attention to. The knowledge that somebody is already looking for those vulnerabilities is something you might want to detect. So that's a good kind of thing to, and it could just be sort of straightening up or somebody's trying to really maintain a low profile, but all of a sudden kind of perks up when there's something going on. Again, either arrival or departure or some kind of key something that's happening.
And they've been essentially kind of waiting for that.
Yeah, that's important for them to detect. So, and it's easier for you to do it as a detector / protective detector because you should already have the schedule of when that's going to happen. So before arrival of principal and before departure of principal, you should already be heightened looking at all the vantage points if you're positioned to do that, of course. And to see if, within the next few minutes, principal is going to arrive or depart. And is there anything correlating in the area to that, to somebody, because they don't necessarily know. In fact, if they knew, they wouldn't have to collect this intel. They're collecting this intel in order to find out.
Yeah.
So for them, it's somewhat of a surprise. Of course, they're expecting it to happen, but they don't know exactly when it's going to happen. So it's like, oh shit, here he comes. Okay, get your phone. And somebody who's doing just something like that, boom, you might have just detected something that gives you an indication that there's some kind of something being done, maybe a hostile planning process being conducted.
Solid. Good to go.
And again, that person doing that kind of stuff, that's not the main threat, of course. The main threat is what the information is being used for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just one little spot in their little hostile plan.
It's the indication of the planning.
Yeah, solid. Any other frequently asked questions that come to mind?
There's that, I call it the dichotomy between surveillance detection and counter surveillance. A lot of people that ask for counter surveillance are actually asking for surveillance detection.
Mm-hmm.
Some people who ask for surveillance detection are actually asking for counter surveillance. And let me make a very important definition there. Again, I define surveillance detection as the detection of the issue. It culminates in a report. Counter surveillance is when you flip the tables and you go offensive and you start following them.
Mm-hmm.
In order to do counter surveillance, at least in the state of California, you need a PI license for that. That's not even protective intelligence. That's already private. At least legally speaking, you're already following people. You're already investigating people. To do it legally, you need a PI license.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had requests. We don't do that kind of work. I personally, I have colleagues that I refer people to when I get requests like that. Oftentimes I get requests like that. And I have to mention that we don't do that kind of work. It's it's a different dynamic, and we don't do PI kind of counter surveillance stuff. So that's a pretty common one. It often happens, to give you examples, of when there is a threat on your client.
Mm-hmm.
I've done cases where the threat comes in. This is usually when SD has to be conducted very quickly. It's not a very comfortable situation where how quickly can you get there and start doing SD? Whoa, no prep, no nothing, no advances. I've had a few of these. It's not comfortable, but you do what you can because they've had a threat being issued. They're issued a threat, and now they want to do another protective layer around the facility. But in some cases, they want the person who issued the threat to be surveilled.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in that case, that you're already going, it's not so much counter surveillance, but you're going offensive. You're going surveillance on a person of interest.
Person of interest, yeah.
And in that, as I said, that's not the kind of work we usually do. And I'll refer somebody to somebody else, but that is not surveillance detection. You're already doing surveillance on
now you're doing
POI
counter surveillance or surveillance.
Yeah.
Solid. Okay. So yeah.
And again, it might kind of be very indistinguishable for a lot of people, but legally it's very distinguishable. You need a PI license for this, and for this is a protective, defensive aspect. So you don't need a PI license for a protective defensive function. You do need it if you're going investigative / offensive.
Yeah, Roger. Okay. Common misconceptions about SD, other than people thinking it's cooler than it. Well, it's cool when it works. I mean, it's pretty cool, But common misconceptions that you run into or see new guys make.
Okay, so some of them. Let me break it down between common misconceptions of more on the client side and common misconceptions or mistakes from the operator end of things, of people who get into SD. So from the client side, I think I mentioned a few of them where this confusion between are we talking pure, dedicated, covert SD operators, or are we talking about enabling overt, conventional? It could be very high-end operators, but if they're still operating overtly to have some SD elements. There are also misconceptions regarding what covert means. Some people think, I've even had a client come up from LA thinking that an operator in a suit and tie, black suit and tie with a pigtail on their ear with their principal would be covert Secret Service style. And I had to explain, no, that's very overt. There's nothing covert about that.
We're going to be on TMZ in 5 minutes.
So that there's confusion about what that might mean. You in most cases you have an overt security, low profile security, and then covert security. So a lot of people mix up covert and low profile with overt, or at least between low profile and covert, and they don't quite understand that. That you're not being in a uniform or not being in a suit and tie doesn't necessarily make you covert. You're just lowering the profile. So maybe a lot of people might not detect that, but some people might. A professional will probably detect that. You're not actually working covert, you're working low profile. That's fine. There's advantages and disadvantages to every one of these. So it isn't to say that that's a mistake. It's just it's important to fit the right solution for what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So those are, and then the confusion between surveillance detection and counter surveillance requests that I've had to do SD on a POI. Here's where the POI lives. Can you do SD on them the whole weekend? It's like, no. You don't see, that's counter. I'm already doing surveillance on them. That's not a protective measure.
Yeah.
It's protective in general, but you want straight up a surveillance on them. You don't want surveillance detection on your client. You want surveillance on the POI. That's a different, again, that's PI license kind of stuff. This is protective stuff. From the operator end, again, some of these still exist, particularly the one about operators who supposedly have worked covert or covertly, and in reality, no, you just were ununiformed, non-uniform, but that's not really covert necessarily.
Okay.
It isn't just a question of what you might have been wearing. It's everything about how you have been conducting yourself, what you were doing. It goes a lot deeper than just the outer layer. You're not just a chameleon that changes the outside. It's about how you move and how you react and what your goal is altogether with the covert, either covert field intelligence or even covert protection. And I think maybe a good segue here is to talk about, since I've trained and worked with a lot of people, most of the people who gravitate into this kind of stuff, unsurprisingly, are people with really solid, strong military, law enforcement, security backgrounds.
Yeah.
And they want to up their game, or they want to get into this interesting field of SD. And something that comes up a lot in training, but also unfortunately in operations, is that they bring some tendencies, some protector tendencies into field intel that don't necessarily work too well.
Yeah,
So
what do you see?
So the posture that you take as a protector, that head on a swivel, all the good stuff, all the great stuff as a protector, the commanding presence, head on a swivel, visual control, patrolling an area,
eye contact, heavy eye contact.
Yeah, and just all the elements of good, solid control and deterrence, and you bring that into the SD game, and it's terrible. You're burning yourself as an operator. It's just what you want to do if you're working covert is not do any of those things.
Yeah.
So, for example, I think I have. Just because I can't do justice to this, just like last time, I'll keep referring to either my book or the Protection Circle blog, where you can look up articles that I wrote about specifically about this, tips and suggestions for covert operators and tips and suggestions for SD operators, where I talk a lot about these issues. And I had, for example, in one of the SD operations we did in San Francisco a few years ago, we detect a guy. He's a young guy. He's got kind of a crew cut going on. He's got one of those sort of like cool military-ish looking 5'11" backpacks. He's got tactical boots. He's wearing jeans and kind of and sort of like a button shirt untucked like this. He's got some good muscle on him. He's got a little bulge here in the back from a radio. And he's got all these indicators with his appearance and his behavior, and he's taking a position across the street. We're already doing SD. There's a ton of security for the venue. We're doing SD. The security from the venue doesn't know about us. Mostly for public relations reasons. We don't report to them or anything. We're reporting to an intel department in the corporation, and they
compartmentalize completely.
Yeah, exactly. And they get to deploy if we need a security response. And here's this guy, and he's taking a position. It's not even an SD position. It's not even a good surveillance vantage point. He's just across the street leaning on some newspaper stand, and he's so awful. He's trying to be covert, and he's wearing all the wrong things.
Yeah.
And he's looking awful. And I report it because, it's somebody who's observing. It's something I need to report. I mentioned that I do not think this is a hostile observer. I think this is somebody that's working security, that's probably taking it on themselves, or somebody got a bit ambitious there. Yeah. But it's bad to do that, particularly if you have public relations issues, and somebody might spot that and bust them out, and the corporation might look bad for it. So if you're gonna go covert, you have to go all the way. You can't just go low profile and hope for the best. And those are the kinds of things that I see, that people who transition out of security, out of that mindset, and they don't do it all the way. So they're going to be too close, for example. It's very difficult to let go of this idea of allow a potential hostile to be closer to the principal than you are. Remind yourself that you're doing intel. You're not doing physical protection. Wow. Stop patrolling. A lot of patrolling going on. We don't patrol. We can go mobile, but we definitely don't want to patrol, because that's a classic mistake.
Once or twice,
yeah. It's kind of I always mention that all of these things that I point out, that I write about, that I try to correct with people, obviously I made all those mistakes myself. Yeah. I think it should be obvious if it's not already. That's the reason why I'm so good at catching those things. Yeah. Because I know exactly where that's coming from. I know exactly what that feels. I still have the inclination to do it myself. I'm a bit more experienced and trained to do otherwise. But,
It's very interesting, because they're like, with security, like, you kind of want to be the man, you know what I mean? Like, you kind of like want to be close to the client and be very, very proactive, and you're looking around and things. And this is like such a much more subversive, like gentle art,
you're setting, you're helping other people be the man.
Yeah.
Especially if they're going to do the follow-up, you're giving them all the info, and then you're just ghosting out of there. Nobody will ever know about you.
Awesome. Yeah.
And even more than that, you'd love to find out what happens later. Yeah. If there isn't a straight up security response, wouldn't that be awesome? Whatever happened? It took me 3.5 days till I made a detection, and that was a sweet detection that I made there. Yeah. What in the world happened? I want to know. And guess what? None of your business. Mm-hmm. It's you shouldn't even ask.
It's
a need to know, compartmentalized. If the intel department wanted you to know, they would notify you if we need to detect them further, if there's a follow-up. But you're, in most cases, a source of intel, not a client of intel. They're not going to tell you anything. Yeah.
You're a source of intel, not a client of intel. Yeah. I love that. Are there any any hacks that come to mind? Any cool kind of shortcuts or things you've learned in the field that you don't see other places?
I think even to go just superficially with how you want to appear, say clothing and so forth. Yeah. I always tell people, stay away from anything tactical, of course. You don't want any tactical pants or backpacks, or if you got good, you got a good physique on you, put something bulky that you don't see.
Stop trying to be the man.
Exactly. Yeah. Keep a bunch of clothes in your closet. Like, I think I even mentioned this, a bunch of silly looking fashion jeans that your wife got you a while ago, or some cardigan sweaters that just like, what the hell is that? Some aunt got you a bunch of years ago. And those are perfect, because all the stuff that doesn't represent your personality is exactly what you want. It's going to hide who you are and what you're really doing. It doesn't look the part. It doesn't look like something that fits a tactical field operation, which is exactly why you want it. That's exactly the advantage of something like that. So those are little things. Stay away from any, even the 511, or you can find these things where it's called covert tactical. Nope. Anything that says covert on it isn't, okay. It's not. It doesn't look right.
It's not covert.
Yeah. So it might sell pretty well, but it's usually BS.
Yeah. Because the trained eye is going to be like, okay, all right. Yeah. I saw that commercial too.
Everybody goes on 511. I know what that is.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What would you say is the hardest or worst part about SD, in your opinion, in experience?
Yeah, so tedium, I talked about that. Ambiguity, I think I alluded to that when I talked about the fact that they don't, your client, whoever you're reporting the information to, at least in my experience, isn't going to tell you whatever happened with that. And just the ability to maintain, the ability to maintain. There's a ton of tedium, and it's mostly self-discipline that will enable you to maintain that, because a lot of it is really hard. And sometimes I describe, for every like molehill of a detection, there's a mountain of patience and tedium that has to come before. And the ability to do something like that, the ability to just grind your teeth for that one boom, that one sweet detection, or as is often the case, no detection. And it just ends and you go home and that's it. But you did your job and you provided another set of eyes and high-level detection capabilities. And it's good news in a sense, nobody showed up to do any, but you gave your client that perspective that they didn't have before.
Yeah. And some satisfaction. Hopefully.
Exactly.
Some peace of mind, which is what we're all here to do, really.
Yeah.
What would you say are the hardest lessons you've learned in the field?
I think, I talked about it last time with my initial training, of course, was really hard. I thought I would do a lot better and I didn't. So the very, very humbling experience of making that hard transition from protective operations to field intel, and the fact that the path between the two is lined with very important mistakes that you have to make, and mistakes that have to be pointed out to you. And that's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. Was for me. I'm, like everybody else, it's not easy, but making those really hard, embarrassing mistakes. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. These are, as I said, important mistakes, but that's how you learn how to do it. And
what was like one of the mistakes, if you don't mind?
I think it's the expectation of the fact that the correlations, for example, would appear suspicious.
Yeah.
You would detect something like that. How would you not? Somebody's correlating to the target, and how could you not detect that?
Yeah.
There's just so much going on around, and having conducted enough courses myself, to see. And then in the course, for what happens a lot in the course is that you have role players, playing hostile surveillance that the SD trainees have to detect. Now, the role players are not directed specifically by me. I might go as far as telling the role player, okay, this is a mobile thing. You have to go mobile after the principal. Oftentimes the principal is me. Or at least be in the area. Here are some vantage points, but I'm not directing the role players. They have to do it themselves, because otherwise it's not so realistic.
Yeah.
I detect the role players, A, because I know how to do it. B, obviously, because I know who they are. I hired them to do it, so I can detect them. And noticing how difficult it is for trainees to detect that. These are, 5, 6, 7 operators, all with really solid backgrounds. And we have to do this mobile thing over and over and over and over again. The role player is behind me all the time, and no detection. Okay, let's run it again. Exactly the same. No detection. Exactly the same. By the fourth time, okay, yes. Here's that guy. It takes like 4 times to detect somebody following the principal around, just a few blocks around downtown, because it's really hard. You'd think, like, why would it be so hard? There's only one guy following the whole way.
Yeah.
Well, they're not following right on top. They're following with a good amount of distance. And I remember it myself. It's really difficult.
Wow. And and then you take that into real life, and it's like, man, I have to really pay attention and apply these in order to really be efficient at this. Otherwise, things can be right in front of my face. And
There is nothing straightforward about it. It is really difficult. I don't care how good you think you are. It's very, very difficult to detect some of these things.
Yeah. Wow. What would be your proudest moment with SD, with regards to SD?
Yeah, I think so. The detections are a good one when you've made a solid detection, either something like that, the drone, or something like a POI I detected in the city. Going between different vantage points, and then boom, you have like a pinpointed result that you can give either the protective team or the intel department. It's those kinds of things. Those sort of eyes in the field when you can detect something. It's also okay. It's a little vaguer and maybe not quite as satisfying to not detect anything, which is to say the client has a huge concern. Somebody's issued threats. They said that they're going to come in the next few days. And we really are concerned, and they know about security, and we want an extra eyes there. So we have a team there, and we don't detect anything, and that's okay because the person didn't show up. But we're there to tell them that nobody showed up, nobody was there planning anything. Again, it's not quite as satisfying because it's omission rather than commission. It's the absence of anything, but you've equipped them with the information that you're good. No one has shown up because without you, all they have is guesswork. Security's not going to detect that. Yeah. And they have a concern, and they're trying to balance this vague kind of risk profile without knowing who's actually out there. So now they know who's actually out there or who isn't out there.
Awesome. And they have some answers, and they have some perspective and some content about it. That's solid. What would you say about Fieldcraft, SD Fieldcraft, that's applicable not only in the security industry, but also to civilians?
Yeah. Once again, I keep saying this. I have an article exactly about that. Awesome. It's based on I think the last chapter in my book. Not to denigrate the field of intelligence and surveillance and surveillance detection, this isn't exactly rocket science. If you understand the principles of hostile surveillance, even just the knowledge of where vantage points are, you can apply them to anything. So in security, we apply it to our clients, and we talk about assets. Well, you're your own client, or your family is your own biggest asset, or your house, or wherever, whatever you care about. So you can apply these principles to yourself as well. Principles in PLE, not PAL, where where can you be observed from? What are the vulnerabilities of your own workplace, of your own residence, of your kids' school, of stuff like that, of where should you look and what kind of awareness should you have when you're out and about in the street, when you're meeting people somewhere. All of those kinds of things, you can apply all of them to yourself. And very important for me to say, because a lot of people think that I live in this bubble of covert SD. I don't. I really don't. You can go as far or as near as you want with that. You don't necessarily have to live in some crazy paranoid bubble. I don't. But the general knowledge of it can help you. And if there are times where it's more important to pay more attention, then you can apply it pretty much anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And it's like being having that protection mindset. It helps you focus on different things, see things differently, and act in ways that really just keep you and your family more secure. You look at a bunch of people on a street and you see it, you're going to take in different information based on your perspective and your paradigm and your training and your background as a normal civilian would. And it's really understanding that art and then being able to apply it to your civilian life. You're going out to the movies and who's who in the zoo. You know, you walk in and you're paying attention to who's where and what's going on and where you're going to sit and all these little things that give you a little bit of an edge and help you kind of protect yourself and your family.
Yeah. And the follow-up, what you do with that is it doesn't necessarily have to be tactical at all. In fact, it's better oftentimes if it isn't anything covert or tactical in any kind of sense. You know, if you're going in someplace, either a bar or somewhere or whatever it is, and there's some people who are clearly in some vantage point that it caught your eye and they're totally checking, you know, you don't necessarily have to play any kind of cat and mouse game with them. You know what? I'm going to the other place, or this is not a good area for right now. There's, you know, I'm heading out of here. Just prevent it from in the first place, you know, which oftentimes you want to do with your principal as well. If you can avoid danger rather than encounter it and counter it. Obviously you want to do that, but you have to be aware of what's around you in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah. Best places to learn SD?
Again, something that I wrote about. I'll start with a little kind of admitting the fact that we don't have in HICOM, we haven't had an open enrollment SD course in quite a while. Those are difficult to do. And I have some ideas about SD training that sort of varies from other SD training providers in general. I have found that SD training mostly focuses on kind of detection and how to detect and the mechanics of detection, which is really important, and a little less about the experience of it, of the dealing with the tedium, which is super important. It's very difficult to put that in a course. How are you going to put people in the field for a week to bore them off, to bore them completely through? You can't do a course like that. So it's very, very difficult. And because of that reason, and because of some other reasons where it's really difficult for a company like ours, which we are a service provider, we're not a training academy. So logistically, it's difficult for us to provide for people who are looking for training academy. So the only trainings that I do are for clients who want me to come and train their teams, or if there's a dedicated team that wants to come and do a proper kind of thing. So it's not an open enrollment situation. AS Solution does open enrollment, I know, and I think ESI does, and there's a few others. I think PFC in Vegas does, not SD, but I think they do a covert protection. They have a different kind of name for it, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't looked it up in a while. But yeah, those are some of the places that you can go for. I think East Coast, I know of some, but not specifically. So yeah, those would be the kind of the main. I think AS Solution and ESI would be your places to really go and to get started. And
awesome. What is inductive observation, real quick? And is there a deductive observation because there's an inductive observation?
Yeah. So that's a term I made in one of my articles, and also it made it into the book. So that's the ability to observe and try to understand what's happening. It's essentially a Sherlock Holmes game. I know in Sherlock Holmes, oddly enough, they're calling it they have a nifty kind of the science of deduction. Strictly speaking, it's not deduction, it's induction, because you're not starting. Deduction is more of starting from a principle and looking for how the principle is implemented. Here, we're starting from the bottom. We're looking at indicators, and we're trying to see if the indicators lead to some kind of idea or principle regarding the person. So it's something that I apply to people, and it's the ability to observe people and figure them out. Where are they coming from? Where are they going based on what's on them? And we touched on this a little bit last time, where nothing that's on you is random. You put everything on you, and it represents your who you are and what you're going for with what you're doing. Most of what comprises your appearance is chosen by you. Unchosen appearance age, race, gender, so forth, that's not telling me anything important, because what I'm looking for is intent. Security is all about intent, specifically looking for hostile intent. And hostile intent is something that I'm looking for through indicators that have to do with your appearance and with your body language. Body language is anybody who's familiar with Left of Bang, Patrick Van Horn. Him and me have gone back and forth a lot over the years. We're friends and we love each other's. I love his book. His book is awesome. Left of Bang. And we met and we've talked and we wrote each other and we debated online about stuff, because our main thing is the fact that I go into the applying these principles. I call it inductive observation. Patrick Van Horn's idea is, again, you can also look at that as a certain kind of inductive observation. I apply it to appearance in addition to just body language. What you have on you, what you are indicating to and we talked about the fact that, say, you have your ruggedized watch on your wrist and that wedding ring that kind of, also you see it in a lot of kind of guys who have some kind of background or sort of like a stronger kind of thing.
Hold up.
Yeah.
Tungsten.
Yeah. And all these little things that people put on them that they either do or don't realize that they give information about the individual, let alone if the person is carrying something or how they have their hair, their facial hair, everything else. That haircut. Shoes are a big one. You always look at shoes. So all these little tips to raise your consciousness to it and try to ask your question: what does that mean? Where is this person coming from? Where are they going? What are their interests from here? Why did they put that on themselves before they left their house to come to this place at this time? Yeah. And you ask these questions and you play these games, and sometimes you get it wrong and sometimes you get it right, and you keep learning as you go.
Yeah. That's good stuff, man. I love that stuff. That's everyday stuff.
And you apply it to any kind of form of security, executive protection, or SD as well. Or
even business, sales, life, walking around, going.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, this is being an efficient and effective human being.
Yeah.
You should be kind of paying attention to these visual cues.
Yeah, you should always apply it to yourself before you apply it to anybody else.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, look in the mirror and kind of be like, what am I giving away? And it's the reason I haven't taken my tattoos beneath my sleeve line.
Yeah,
all the tattoos, I was thinking, maybe I'll get a sleeve. And I'm like, I'll be given so much information,
Yeah.
You can already tell, like, I'm a bald guy. So, like, you kind of get a feel. I mean, if I'm bald before my time, okay, this guy's shaving his head every day. He might be a hard head,
Yeah.
Facial hair, keeping it a little trimmed. Maybe he's paying attention to details.
Yeah.
But he's got a beard. He's probably a little more of a kind of wannabe tough guy, too. He's got a little bit of tattoo going on,
Yeah.
I profile myself,
Yep.
So that's good stuff, man. That's life skills. Mommy, daddy, all you guys, kids listening, y'all should be using this stuff.
Yeah.
Give you a window into who you're dealing with. Okay. So any lifestyle considerations for the SD artist? Anything like things that make you better at SD, or just lifestyle stuff that you want people to maybe look at doing that'll make them better or better protectors? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it all starts with raising your consciousness. So you have to be able to be aware of all these things and of a bunch of things that didn't necessarily come into your consciousness as anything particularly important or whatever. Notice all of that and the balance, always the balance. So you're raising your level of awareness.
Yeah.
And what initially happens, and it happened to me, and I've seen it happen to a lot of people, is you get crazy with that because it makes you into it. Paranoid, right? Yeah. And then so you have to raise it up, and then you have to find a way to bring it down to a manageable level, whatever level it is for you. Because I don't think it's particularly healthy to live or even just work in such a sense of I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of
activity,
noise out there, and there's a lot of stuff. So you have to really, really work on your filters in order to balance that awareness that you've developed. That, I think, is really the key, because if you're not aware, then boom, you're missing the whole thing.
Yeah,
if you're super aware, you're either totally paranoid because every single individual is suspicious, and then you miss the one that was, you just reported 99 others, so you just drowned in the sea of nonsense. If you don't apply the right filters to that everything else,
and that
all the other tips, we talked about some of those things of how to dress and posture you take, and stop patrolling, and stop with the head on the swivel, lean, kind of sit back in your, just slouch back,
be a nasty civilian,
just be on your phone,
yeah,
and be sort of dim-witted, kind of like if you're trying to pick your nose or whatever, just don't look like an operator if you're trying to not be an operator. So
don't be the man.
Yeah, be conscious. And again, that has to do with that inductive observation and that consciousness of how you look to others.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be, I think I read, if you don't want to be a bull in a china, you just got out of the Marines, for example, you did security for a few years. Now you want to work covert. If you don't want to be a bull in a china shop, you have to realize you have big horns on your head. You're not realizing that how you look to other people. So that ability to self-reflect is very important. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. That's huge. I think we covered it pretty good, brother.
Man.
Thanks so much for your time once again. It's always good, man. I always learn a whole lot, get a lot of awesome perspective, brother. Any shameless plugs, what you up to, where people can find you, where you want them to go?
Okay. So, I work for Hicom Security Services. You can find them at hiconsecurityservices.com. We work primarily in the San Francisco Bay Area, but we do shoot out occasionally for when the need arises. You can find my writing at Protection Circle, protectioncircle.org. Please check out my book, Surveillance Zone. It's now available not just in print and Kindle, but also in audio. I recorded the audio myself, like I said. That's why I have all this fancy equipment. So it's my annoying voice narrating my own book with a lot of extra bonus material on there that is not in the printed, in the hard copy or the Kindle. So you can find that, pretty much everywhere. It's on iTunes as well. That's pretty much it. I'm really easy to find on social media. Pretty much any social media you'll look for Toben or for Protection Circle, and you'll find me.
Sounds good, brother. That sounds good. All right, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
All right, thank you.
I look forward to doing stuff with you in the future, brother.
All right, thanks a lot, man.
The next one. Out.
Boom. Yo, special announcement. We've got the very first Protector Symposium coming up this November 15th and 16th. Check the website, Byron Rodgers Motivation, for more information about it. You can purchase tickets there. It's going to be amazing. We've got Ed Calderon and Yosef Badu coming on to teach us some hardcore soft skills. Check it out. Get involved. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. We're going to have a great time leveling up as Protector. So check the website, ByronRodgersMotivation.com or ExecutiveProtectionLifestyle.com for all the details and to purchase you and your security detail, police department, or family's tickets. Out. Boom. And to support this podcast, go to ExecutiveProtectionLifestyle.com and contribute to our Patreon account. That Patreon account is what helps me make this podcast possible, contributing to this brand, what we're doing here, making it so that I can bring better guests on, making it so that we can plan more events and just expand the contribution to the private security industry, and also to making America a safer place by teaching people how to protect themselves and the mindset behind that, the lifestyle behind that. You guys are already killing it. $1 a month. $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month, whatever you can do that you know you would probably just lose in the mattress anyway or spend on McDonald's. Hey, you want to put it towards something that's going to good use, put it towards a podcast, and get involved in our Patreon account at executiveprotectionlifestyle.com. And if you want to find me, that's byronrodgersmotivation.com. Do whatever you can, contribute whatever you can to that Patreon account, because it makes all of these things possible, ladies and gentlemen. So much love. Thank you, and thank you for making those contributions. You guys rock. We're already doing amazing there, and it's just because of you guys. So thanks once again for those contributions. Boom. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode of Executive Protection Lifestyle Podcast. This whole entire thing actually just started off as a Facebook group that blew up and is one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing, executive protection Facebook group online. So if you haven't joined the Facebook group, join the Facebook group. Follow us on Instagram and check us out at executiveprotectionlifestyle.com. If you want to find me, that's byronrodgersmotivation.com, and I'm on all the social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook as well. So until the next podcast, y'all, stay sharp out there. And as I say it, one mind, many weapons. Talk soon. Out.